You are listening to The Last Fireflies, a radical climate podcast bringing you discussions of climate science and activism from all around Europe. Welcome back to another Campfire Talk episode. I am Robbie, one of your regular hosts of the show. And today, our guest is Jonas from Norway, who is organizing together with the Extinction Rebellion in the climate movement in Norway. Before we kick things off, would you like to say a few things about yourself and also about XR Norway?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been a core organizer in Extinction Rebellion and also a spokesperson for about 5 years' time. I have planned together with others about 50 direct actions. So I have plenty of experience both from planning and executing and media and also mobilization in the Norwegian context. I've also been trying to set up other initiatives, such as try to put up some new student movements, and also been building the Nordic Climate Justice Coalition within the Nordic climate movement, but mostly on the civil disobedience and direct actions.
With this podcast, our idea is to give also some information about climate science and what's happening, but also to give people the confidence and knowledge to also to start from zero a group, and also take a group from low level to really big actions that you have also done in Norway. And that's why I'm really glad that you are with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So when we introduce the pod, we say that we try to focus on, well, especially the Balkans and Eastern Europe, because this is where we are located, but generally what is happening in the climate movement outside the EU core. Norway is a bit a particular case because it's a high-income Western country. It's not like a semi-periphery or like Romania. But at the same time, it's not part of the EU. And like, for example, when I search for, let's say, top 10 gas producers in the EU, right, then Norway doesn't show up. Another statistic which I hear a lot is when this Neptune Deep project in Romania will start extracting fossil gas from the Black Sea next year, Romania is going to become the top gas producer in the EU. Yeah, but at the same time, like Norway is extracting 5 or 10 times as much as Romania will.
Yes.
And also there's the UK, which is also not part of the EU. So it might give kind of a distorted view when you say top gas producer, right? I think a lot of people know that Norway is quite a large fossil fuel producer globally. It's one of the big players. But at the same time, it's a relatively small country. And if you look up some statistics, which I did for this episode, so if you look for statistics per capita, actually Norway is in the top 3 producers per capita for both oil and gas on the planet, at the same level with some of the Gulf states, Qatar, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, which is surprising to me also, and I guess to a lot of the listeners. So that being said, can you tell us a bit more about the role of fossil fuels in the Norwegian economy and how is that perceived in the public consciousness, especially considering how the climate crisis is accelerating in the last few years?
Yeah. So Norway is Europe's biggest fossil producer by quite a margin. We are the 7th biggest fossil exporter in the world when it comes to gas, and around top 10 when it comes to oil. So we're massive. But I think for both in the Eastern Europe and Western Europe and across the world, Norway is often portrayed as this green country that's sustainable. And that hasn't just happened by luck. It has been very smart marketing and very smart PR to kind of frame Norway as green. But we have this massive dilemma that we are not only a big fossil producer today, but we are one of the most aggressive expanders of oil and gas today in this world. On the offshore, we have the highest investments in new fossil infrastructure. So it completely shatters that view. But it's not just how people look at Norway from abroad, but also within Norway. So if we're a Norwegian citizen, and you brought your kids to a football training, you would see that that football training camp would probably be sponsored by Equinor, which is the Norwegian oil state thing. And then when school children go to museums, they're very often museums are funded by the oil. So it's this very strong identity in Norway connected that oil is that's our welfare system. And that was quite interesting. And I think it's really something to learn from as well. When we found oil in 1969, we decided that this money is not just going to go to some few billionaires. We're actually going to put that money into a fund that's going to fund the welfare system. So if you look at, for example, UK organizers against climate, when they try to stop oil and gas, it's easier to be like, we are the people versus the 1%. But when we are talking, we have to stop expansion, we have to stop because we're in a ecological collapse, then kind of the sentiment within the population is that no, oil is part of our identity. It's what brings our welfare, and it brings a lot of joy to all of us. So it makes it a very difficult context because people are so comfortable. They don't experience climate catastrophes and like droughts and to that degree. And we're still the one that earns so much from it. They're funding humanitarian organizations, museums, our soccer team, our cycling team, our ski stars. Like everything is kind of branded as Norway's success is due to oil and gas. So when I say we should stop, I'm kind of attacking something that's very Norwegian. And people are like, no, we can't talk about that. So that's a bit different, I think, than some other fossil producer country.
Norway has this so-called sovereign wealth fund, if I'm calling it correctly. It's basically a fund which has been established from the profits from the national oil company and the revenues from fossil fuel exploitation. And then it invests in other stuff to create basically profit, but profit that goes to the public. And it's interesting, this fund is the biggest in the world. It's twice as big as China's sovereign wealth fund, like 2 trillion. Of course, there are other like private hedge funds and stuff that are bigger, but it's the biggest public sovereign investment fund. It's a very interesting entity, and it matters because it's so large. It matters what it invests in. And I read that there is this ethical divestment system. The idea is to disinvest the money from this fund from companies that are problematic. But I also read that last year they put it on hold for a year to figure out if it's going to continue or what. I'm curious if you know more about this.
Yes, so I have planned many action against this fund, so I know it very well. So just to give some background information, when we found oil, we were like, let's make a sovereign welfare fund where the profits from oil and gas is put aside. So if we get 100 billion in profits from oil and gas, we put it in there. And then there's a rule that like that fund is supposed to be for kind of generations to come. So each government can take out 3% of the fund's value and put it into our welfare budget, like our annual budget. But the rest is kind of have to be left there. And in the 70s and 80s, lots of the money went into that fund, and then some of it went back to the like national expenditure, but it became bigger and bigger. So in the beginning, it was a lot connected to fossil fuels. Then they decided that we're going to put this on the market. So then all this fund was kind of invested in all types of companies around the world. So literally 1 or 2% of every big company in the world is owned by a Norwegian welfare fund. Google, Nvidia, Tesla, you name it. And what the government has decided is that they're going to invest where they see most profits. So you have like 50 people, just traders, working on that to kind of figure out where to invest to maximize profits. And this has grown massively. So today, I read newly that in 2025, our welfare fund grew by $200 billion just last year. And very little of that came from oil and gas. It's mostly just from speculating. And because the world economy is going up, then the welfare fund goes up. And they're saying that it's apolitical. So we're like, why are we investing in companies that destroy our future? Why can't this fund pull out of fossil fuel companies and rather go to renewables? But then the government says, we want this fund to be apolitical, and then we invest in whatever, let's say fossil fuel is 5% of the world economy, then 5% of our stocks is going to be in fossil fuels. If 10% of world economy is in housing, then 10% of our stocks should be in housing. You see? But then over the years, they have been heavily criticized, not just from climate, but also because they have been investing heavily in the genocide in Gaza. So this welfare fund has been investing, like it's the biggest investor in Europe in companies that's on UN watch lists that's complicit in the genocide. So the Palestine movement and also climate movement has kind of come together and had lots of actions against, like saying, this is fundamentally breaking our human rights. You're investing in human rights and ecological collapse and genocide. This has to stop. And then we have an ethical committee, which is just a joke. I mean, they're just there for the optics. And they have been saying, no, we can't then do anything because that will be political and we have to keep to the profits. And then they have excluded some, but that's like after lots of pressure. And because there's been so much disagreement from it, then the government was forced to kind of do something new that actually brings into ethical considerations into being. While they're doing that, they just said, we're just going to stop the ethical council and have no ethical considerations until we have a new solution. So that's why the ethical committee was shut down. And currently, there's not really any ethical considerations. So, yeah, it's basically just for profit. Most politicians, they would say this is a fantastic thing that is making sure that our future generation have lots of money. But if you speak to any climate or Palestine action, you would just say they're openly supporting human rights violations and genocide and ecological collapse as long as it's profitable.
Do you have a feel for what the people in general feel like someone who is not politically engaged?
There have been surveys where 80% of the Norwegian population say that they don't want the oil fund to invest in human rights violations. So the Norwegian people want much stronger ethical rules, but the financial sector is not really willing to that, it seems like.
Well, that basically summarizes what's the problem with the capitalist world system, right?
Yeah, it does.
Of course, we don't want to give like a 3-hour lecture about Norway's economy and stuff. Just kind of a feel for what are the issues. Most of all, I would like to hear, and I guess our listeners also, about what you and XR and the other groups that you're organizing together with, what you are trying to do against this big investment, both financial and social, of the country in fossil fuels. Could you just describe a little bit what the climate scene is like in Norway? Is it small? Is it big? Maybe what are the major groups, if there are a few major groups that are active? And is the climate movement focused more on direct action or more like lobbying or lawsuits, stuff like that?
Yes, so I would say the environmental movement in Norway has long historical roots because we're a very nature-rich country. So you have more like classical NGOs doing lobbying and writing reports and these types of big organizations with tens of thousands of members, which is quite a lot, given that Norway is like 5 million people. So the environmental movement is quite big, but they are very much NGO lobbying oriented. And then you have a bit more disruptive direct action groups. I would say XR Norway is the biggest one. You also have some recently after the A22 network where you have like Stop Oljeit and people like Stop Oil Licensing and people against fossil power. That's been other type of organizations that doing more like high-vis, like stunts actions. And then you also have some other youth organizations like Nature and Youth that are doing also civil disobedience, but mostly do political work. So I would say it's quite tilted towards more like classical, and also like lawsuits is quite big. You have Greenpeace, Nature and Youth, and other organizations doing bigger lawsuits against the Norwegian state.
I read that last year or a few years ago, there was a lawsuit brought by, I guess, Greenpeace and some other groups at the European Court of Human Rights against the country for basically investing in the climate crisis. But I guess that was lost, I think, if I read well.
Yeah, they lost also in the Supreme Court in Norway, and then they took it further. But there are several lawsuits now. That lawsuit's going to the European Court was about whether the Norwegian government is handing out new licenses in the Arctic. And like, is that unlawful? Can they do that? Or is it not? And at least the Supreme Court was like, that's a political question. The court system cannot have an opinion about that. Whereas more global recent lawsuits is more like, no, there actually are obligations states has to follow, and expanding fossil production is against those. And it's not just political, it's a matter of survival. And there are some actual absolute obligations here. There are new lawsuits going on now. We have been winning some of them. It's just ridiculous. The government says, to give an example, just to show you how it is in Norway, because everyone is like, oil is super good and it's a good thing. And the narrative is that one, Norwegian oil is green.
That's like when Trump is saying clean coal, clean coal.
Exactly. And the second is we need more oil and gas to help Europe switch from Putin. When Yggdrasil, which is like a massive new oil field, when that was opened in the parliament documents, it says that if we open this field, it will reduce 50 million tons of CO2 because this oil is cleaner than all the coal in China, which is just insane. So they literally said if we open this big new oil field, it would reduce more emissions than all Norwegian emit altogether in a year. And then we took that to court, and the court was like, the numbers you're using is not correct. Like, there's no science here. So the state lost because they were just manipulating numbers to kind of create this. So there was no democracy here. So that's why they lost, because they were manipulating the numbers. But now they're just coming up with a new equation, and then they say, well, this is still good.
This is mind-boggling. Also in Romania, this big oil extraction project, Neptune Deep, is going to start next year. And I think in its environmental, feasibility study, it also said like it's going to have a negative carbon footprint because the gas is going to displace the coal, energy produced from coal plants in Romania. And they literally said it's going to have minus tens of gigatons, whatever. I don't know exactly the scale of CO2, which is like the stupidest thing I've ever heard. This seems like the same kind of accounting.
Yeah.
And I think this illustrates quite well why, in a way, classical politics are, a bit bankrupt or inadequate to address the climate crisis, especially as we have also been exploring in our episodes, with this new added information of tipping points, which we are about to activate, and this acceleration of warming, which is a relatively new process. And everything just compresses the timelines. And all these lawsuits and lobbying and everything takes a lot of time. And a lot of the time, they don't even end in something useful. And so that's why with this pod, and I personally also support especially this kind of disruptive direct actions, which you are also have done several big ones in Norway. And so I would like to ask you to talk about some of these actions if you want.
Absolutely. Let's go. So there's been many, but the biggest one was last year in August. I and just a couple of other people planned the biggest direct action against Norwegian oil ever. And we managed to gather quite a lot of activists from the Nordics, some also from Europe. There were some from Italy, France, UK, and Germany, and so forth. And we were about 250 people. First, we had this big political week in Norway where we had like 10, 12 different actions. One of them was the state has this debate channel in the water, and we swam there with banners and surrounded it and then went up on stage and disrupted it live. So that was really cool. And then the main thing was We went to Mongstad, which is one of Europe's biggest oil infrastructure. It's just massive. It's like 10 kilometers long. And through that facility, it goes like tens of billions of kroners each day. So what we did was we blocked all entrances, both to sea and land, for 36 hours.
Nice.
And that really got a lot of attention. It really was a huge thing. That also changed the election a little bit because it was like 3 weeks before the election. At that time, nobody spoke about climate and oil. And the far right was kind of winning, and the Greens were not doing so well. And after that action, it switched, and the Greens came up enough to make sure that the far right didn't win. And the Greens were like saying, I'm not sure if we would have made it without your actions. So that was a big thing, big win. We had Greta Thunberg, which is always showing up in solidarity and never putting herself, like not taking space unnecessary. We also had Aurora, which is maybe the biggest Norwegian singer. She's massive. You guys have to hear her. She's like selling out O2 in London easy several days. So she came to that action and sang for us, and that caught like millions of viewers on social media, and like 60 media outlets globally covered it. So that was big. And then we came back for like more mass actions in Oslo, where we, for example, we surrounded the kind of the street around the parliament, and we put up a people's meeting where we tried to gather the different solidarity movements, speak like, how do we build the people movement we need? So it was both like a disruption, but it was more of an actually sitting down in front and around the parliament and like gathering the ones that understands we need to build people power. So that's probably the big one. In total, we had like 20 actions for over 10 days. So it was quite hectic.
That's awesome. It was mostly Norwegian activists or also people from all around Europe coming to support you?
So kind of the more radical, disruptive part of the Norwegian climate movement is small. We're not that big. So we had very many activists from Denmark and also Sweden coming. So it was about 50-50. In the West Coast, in Mongstad, there were more international than Norwegians. But in the other places, there were more Norwegians.
That's great. Like the problem is also like so large scale, and so we can only fight it in an internationalist approach. So that's great to hear.
Yeah, I think so. And also the year before, we had this oil conference in Stavanger, which is with over 60,000 participants, and we had lots of big action this week. And after that, like there were different Nordic groups, and then we sat down and we were like, the Nordic Climate Youth Movement, let's come together and strategize and skill share and learn from each other. So then we put up a conference in Copenhagen, and we're kind of discussing a more common strategy and skill sharing. And then we decided that the whole Nordic Climate Youth Movement is going to come to Norway in August. And now in 2 weeks, we're having the same conference. We're getting like the 75 of the most central youth climate organizers to sit down in Falun in Sweden for 3 days and kind of, okay, what's the way forward? So that's really interesting to see that we're trying to build coalitions and alliances across countries and also hopefully more in Europe and globally.
Mm-hmm. To give an example of a different kind of action, if you want, I remember when we met a few years ago, you described to me this action that you had that involved blocking an LNG ship. So a ship that was carrying liquefied natural gas from entering a port. Do you want to describe that one? Because it's interesting. It's a different kind of action. It's also blocking something, but it's on the sea. And it feels like a different quality to it.
Yeah.
And impressive also. Like for me, how can you block a giant cargo ship?
Yeah. So we kind of did that in Mongstad. We both had like blockades on the roads to kind of block the refinery, but we also had activists blocking the harbor. In that Mongstad, they have 10 different harbors. So that's just the scale of it. So we could track on marine traffic to see what cargo, like LNG or other ships, is going to dock. There's a security zone. We kind of reach the security zone with a kayak or a boat. And then we inform that we are here now. And then we send that to the cargo ships. And there's rules that they cannot go into that area. So then they just have to dock up and wait there, literally. If you block an LNG, it's very difficult if it's like an open sea. But if it's going somewhere, then you can go where it's supposed to dock, and then they can't enter without the police removing you.
The end goal is not that through this action we will reduce emissions by some great amount, but at the same time it's impressive that for some hours you have blocked some part of the huge fossil fuel machine.
Yeah, it's both great images, like you can just see a small kayak and a massive cargo ship behind with like flaring and a lot of oil infrastructure. That's the good image. But it's also like it costs a lot of money because these cargo ships have tight schedules. So if you disrupt something with a day, then they're kind of late everywhere and it just messes up with the logistical in other ports as well. So yeah, my dream is that we coordinate it in lots of different harbors and docks around the world, and then we can really cause some problems.
That sounds like a good plan for the future, but not the far future, because if it's too far, it will not matter that much.
We have some deadlines.
Exactly. When we are talking about this kind of disruptive direct actions, it also comes with quite a lot of risks. And yeah, I would ask you about two of these risks, if you want to talk about them. First is police violence, which varies a lot by country to country. And I'm curious how it's in Norway. And the other is the legal repercussions. And if you can talk a little bit about that. If you face some legal repercussions, and if yes, what kind of support do you have? Which is also good information to say to other groups how to prepare like legal support.
Yes, so I've been kind of dealing a lot with the legal consequences. Police violence is very unlikely in Norway. It's one of the few countries in Europe where you can expect not to be beaten up. So I often did kind of police contact, and the Norwegian police is professional in the way that they respect you and your human rights. They're not going to use force and beat you up. They're going to have dialogue and then ask you to remove you. And if they remove you, they make sure that there are enough people to carry you so you don't hurt yourself. So it's very different. Like if you go just to Denmark, they will take a pain grip on you until you remove yourself, or sometimes they break your hand if you don't move. And I mean, I'm not going to need to say what's going on in Germany or France, where it's just insane. So it's very different. Norwegian police the police violence is unlikely. So the police is nice, and sometimes they don't arrest you unless they have to, because it's a lot of paperwork for them to take them to court. But if you are taken to court, the fines are ridiculously high. So in Denmark, it's like 200 euros if you get a fine doing civil disobedience, peaceful. In Norway, it's between like 1,000 to 2,000 euros. So it's often 10 times higher in Norway than in Sweden and Denmark. So the way the Norwegian state has decided to crack down on protest is not to be confrontational and to give us the pictures of confrontations and those type of things. They're more like, we are here, everyone's agree, and you're allowed to protest, but I'm going to continue with oil. But they're going to kill you economically and try to stop you from using your right to protest economically. So that's kind of the way they're doing it. But the law system itself is fair. I actually won against the state in the Supreme Court anonymously a couple of years back because the police want to fine me, but I convinced them that they had breached my human rights and disproportional use of force. So there are kind of an independent judicial system in Norway, but if you're fined a lot.
It's also surprising that with a fine you got up to the Supreme Court with the case.
Oh, we have had 8 cases coming up. And they take that seriously. They are criminalizing us and like really heightening the fines, especially if they see that we gain momentum.
And with legal support, do you have lawyers in the environmental movement, or did you get support from, there are some international organizations which help, which our guest from Poland also talked a little bit about. I was curious how you managed the legal support. Did you have to do it alone, for example, or was this already established by the group, by XR, how the support is going to happen, or if you want to say details like this?
Yeah, to be honest, it's been mostly me and some others, a lot of now experience from the legal consequences. So I'm often the one that gives legal briefs and kind of know what's right and not and defend people off sometimes in court as well. but I'm not a lawyer. So we don't have lots of legal support systems, but we have one lawyer that I always call if that helps us. So if there's something in particular, I can call her and she responds. And if you're taken to court, you can apply for having a lawyer, especially if it's a bigger thing. The state normally gives you a lawyer free. In my case, the police said you have to pay this, and then I didn't get a lawyer. I defended myself and I won,
That's nice.
which was a bit insane. And then the state said, we're taking this to the next step. And then when they were kind of saying we don't agree, then they also gave me a lawyer because it's like the next step. And then I lost. And then I took it to Supreme Court and Supreme Court accepted it. And then obviously also get a lawyer for free. So yeah, when we had the big action in August, it was mostly me and the lawyer kind of giving legal advice.
Mm-hmm. Is there any resources that you would like to highlight? Websites or places that people can follow the actions that you're doing? Usually the big actions also appear in international media, but if you have something in particular that you would like to recommend.
I mean, obviously, like we have Instagram and Facebook, but fuck Meta.
Yeah.
So we might have to, I'm not sure I'm going to recommend people using that, but the XR Youth Norway Instagram also shows that doing direct action and grassroots is not just about actions, it's also about community dinners, socials, and having a good time, because you need that in order to not burn out and to be able to stay in this fight. But I think that's also a message, like, don't forget what you see is like the grand, spectacular thing, but there's so much behind where you need a foundation and you need a community in order to sustain yourself through this struggle.
That's such a great point. Thank you for saying it. Yeah. Thanks for offering us your time and energy to record this. And we are going to transition to a how-to section where we go into more detail about one of the actions. So stay tuned for that also. This is a fully listener-supported podcast, and with the price of one coffee or a beer each month, you can help us continue this work by subscribing to our Patreon. We are continuing with the how-to section now with Jonas from XR Norway. We've talked about the climate movement in Norway and some of the actions that they have done with XR Norway and other groups. And we thought it's a good opportunity to go into a bit more detail to talk about what organizing such a big action entails. And in particular, we are talking about the action from last year, 2025, in which Jonas's group and a lot of other people blocked the largest oil refinery in Norway, or maybe in Europe.
Yeah.
I'll just let you take it from here.
Well, yeah, thank you. It's such a big thing. I think where you start is obviously what's your strategy, what do you want to achieve. And for us, it was just before the election. We wanted to show the Norwegian public that the climate movement isn't dead. We want to do something big and disruptive that actually see that people care. And it's possible to block big things and disrupt it for a sustained period of time. So I think just making the plan itself is not that difficult. The two really difficult things is mobilizing. So it was a lot of work to go to different countries, to go to Sweden and Denmark, and to get it out, to create a narrative and a why, and how we're going to do it, and why this matters more than ever, why Norway has to phase out, and kind of pitch that and find the right story and the right kind of demands and these things. That's a lot of work. And the second thing is the logistics. So for mobilization, I think you guys probably know that it's difficult to mobilize as well, but especially in Norway, where people like oil. Oil is not controversial and people are very privileged. So we did a lot of mobilization internationally because we knew that if we were 50 people, we won't be able to succeed. Numbers were critical for us to actually achieve something and block something. And that's why we gave that a lot of emphasis. When it comes to how to actually block something, it really starts with good scouting. So this was on the West Coast, which is like 8 hours from Oslo, the capital. So what you had to do was kind of travel for 2-3 days over to the west coast. We obviously looked at Google Maps and kind of saw the entrances and stuff. But then we also had to take our own pictures. Like we have to get an overview of, is there a lot of cars going in and out? Where are the cameras? Where are the guards? The routines they have? All these things. And scouting is really key to kind of build up that document. And then we also went to sea and kind of traveled on a boat around it to see, okay, where are LNG ships going in and out? How long are they staying? We can get that on marine traffic as well, but we also want to see if it's 6 meters per second wind, can you be out in a kayak? What if it's 8 minutes per second? Can you be in a kayak? Where is the wind coming from? So 6 meters per second might be low water if it comes from one direction, but not if it comes from another. This type of scouting is really key. That needs a lot of time. And then when we kind of have the intel, that's when you really can make good decisions. One massive question is, are you gonna like block the entrances, or are you actually going into the area and going over the fences? If you want to climb over the fences, then it's a whole other ball league. Because then, first of all, the fines, like you can go to jails for a month, and like it can be really legally difficult. But then also when it comes to safety, if you go into the area, you have to know what areas are potential explosives. In some areas, you cannot have anything that kind of have a spark. So you need a special equipment of clothes, special equipment of phone, and that costs a lot of money. So like if you're actually going over the fence, there's so much to think about for your own safety. And you also have to figure out, is that worth it or not? We decided to not do it just because it was too much and we had too much other things to do. And it was easier to block the entrances. Also because we knew that, for example, Aurora the singer would come, and we knew that would be a huge storyline in Norway. So it wasn't really necessary to do something spectacular to get attention. So we were like, it's not strategic. So kind of taking those decisions is key. And then it was really simple, like the scouting, where is cars going in and out? How many people do we need on each section? And then you just have a form, you see how many you need, and then you put enough people, both arrestables and non-arrestables, and you have to make shifts overnight as well. So you have to make kind of a plan for who is sitting from when.
You blocked it for like 36 hours continuously, right?
36 hours, yeah,
Mm.
continuously. You cannot expect an activist is sitting there for 36 hours because it's cold. So that's kind of how many people do we need, who's going in which group. And then we have smaller teams. So you are the coordinator for this blockade, and you have the intel, and that intel is not shared with necessarily others. And when we are on the brief the day before, you speak to your group and say what you're going to do. So that's kind of the easy part. The difficult part is the logistics. We also had action to see. What we really did was just looking at marine traffic to see when ships were coming, and then going into the security zone and like saying, we're here. And then the police have to come and arrest you. But that's difficult if you have a boat and you won't be catched, right? So it's really difficult for the police to kind of do anything if you have 10 kayaks. It takes them lots of time, especially if you have boats. So that's really effective. There's a lot of logistics. So how do you get 10 boats from the east coast to west coast? That means you need transport, you need cars. And then obviously when we had this action, we needed a camp. And if we were 200 people, that means that each activist needs 3 meals per day over 4 days. And that's like over several thousand meals, right? So we had to make that. So then we need the kitchen making enough food, like thousands of meals. And you need 250 people to be transported. So we had buses. My kind of key thing is, it sounds very simple to just think, let's put 200 people there. But when you break it down to, okay, we need a food group. We need 4 people for each meal. And they cannot work more than 6 hours a day. Okay, you need 2 shifts. And we had problems. We were understaffed. So it was really difficult. And yeah, how do you transport activists? How do you communicate effectively? Where do they sleep? Where do you create safe space? You know, that's really the big kind of, and you have to start there with your capacity. not just let's make it the biggest thing ever, but how many people can we actually take care of if we're going to do this? So early on, build capacity in the working groups, in the logistics groups. That's really the key, I would say, for doing big mass actions.
And you organize a camp close to the refinery. Is this next to an urban area?
Yeah, so Mongstad was like 1.5 hours away from Bergen, which is the second biggest city in Norway. And we had a friend of us that owned a farm, like 45 minutes away from the refinery. She was so nice, and she cut the whole field she had so we could sleep there, like 200 people could sleep there. And she also had a big kitchen. Everything was done there. We would never be able to do it without that. That was the first thing we did before we started planning. Call her, can we have your farm these dates? And when we knew that, that was when we could actually start planning. So like, think of these things. Don't do lots of work before you see that you'd have the fundamentals.
Hearing you say, how large scale everything was, I'm surprised that you didn't have the police waiting for you there. Because I think in Romania, there would have been like at least 200 police waiting for us there if we would have planned this action. I think we have not done it, so I don't know, but this is what happened in Romania, for example.
It's a good point. We had said that we're going to do like the biggest thing ever on the West Coast. There are 10 different oil infrastructure on the West Coast we could have been at. But the police figured out, then I put up a police car just next to the farm. So they were kind of spying on us. They had someone there spying continuously. But given the farm, there was like 3 different options they could have gone at. But I think they knew that we would go after the by far biggest one. But we didn't say where it was. And when we had like 2 buses going 4:30 in the morning from the farm, then the police cars followed the buses. So we were a bit stressed that they would maybe stop us from going out of the bus, but they didn't. And there was only one police car kind of following us. And when we came, there was like nothing they could do because we were 200 and they were 4 or 5. And then they came quite a lot of police officers after 2-3 hours. But they saw that we are too many and we don't have that much police resources here. So we're just going to let them sit until they leave because they can't sit forever. So they were there. But they were like, we're not going to remove you. You have the right to protest. And we don't have the resources either to kind of remove you. And then we couldn't stay longer than 36 hours because we hadn't planned for it. So they kind of understood that after 36 hours or 48 hours, we would leave. So instead of creating a big drama, they were letting us stay there. But Equinor was like, can you get them away? And the police were like, they're not making a threat. And there was also like an emergency. And we opened the blockade when there was an emergency because we didn't want to be a risk for life and health. That's also showed to the police that, okay, if there's actually an emergency, they're going to let us through. So that also built quite some trust in a way.
I'm thinking also a little bit about the legal aspect. Maybe to say it like this, I remember a friend was telling me who was part of a big occupation in Germany organized by Ende Gelände at one of the coal mines. And there were a lot of people from outside Germany there. And they were relying on the fact that in Germany, at least then, I don't know if it has changed, the police can retain you for maximum 24 hours. And after that, if they cannot identify you, they have to release you. So they went without the IDs. And simply because there were so many people, the police just, after a few hours, let them go because they couldn't do anything. And I was thinking about if there's something similar in Norway, or if you were planning ahead of how to deal with the possible people being detained or stuff. In the end, I understand that there were like relatively few police and they didn't bother you. But I'm just wondering if you had planned for any kind of, backlash, people being detained, how to handle that.
Yeah. In Norway, the police can hold you as long as they want if they don't have your identity. But we also know that there are very few cells in Norway, especially if you go outside of the city center. So we kind of knew that they wouldn't have capacity to bring all of us into the police station. So if they ID us, then we were saying we're not showing ID unless we, for example, go to the police station. And then if that was the case, then they would have to bring everyone in, and they didn't have cars for that. So that was kind of a way of forcing them that they can't really ideas and then fine us lots for sitting there without them taking us into the custody and so on and so forth. And then we said that it was a personal choice and we gave them legal briefings on it. I know Ende Gelände and I was in Lützerath, and I know their tactics, and I think it makes a lot of sense in certain contexts, yes. I think it's something we have to be cautious about. How do we actually pose a challenge so it's not just sitting there and police can easily deal with us, but how are we actually going to create problems for them? But it is a problem. If you don't show ID in Norway, they can hold you for as long as you want, and we can't just expect everyone to do that either. So we had longer discussions about it in advance, kind of find different ways of dealing with that.
It's kind of the same in Romania also. That's I wanted to ask you this question, right? They will not be able to hold you indefinitely, but you will have some possibly legal repercussion if you cannot show your ID. So it's complicated. What we have learned here is that what's really, really important and maybe invisible to plan such a bigger action is a lot of information beforehand, scouting and planning, and also thinking through the logistics for everything before you can involve a lot of people in an action. But also it's doable. It's just a bit larger scale than what we have talked about before, things that you could do with 4 people.
Yeah, and I also just want to add that we weren't that many people. I mean, in the core organizing group, we were like 7, 8 people. And we managed to get like some logistics groups here and there, but you can do amazing things also with few people as long as you have a good team. So think big, because our world is our future and everything is at stake.
That's all for today. If you would like to support us, you can do that by interacting with and sharing our episodes on social media and subscribing to our YouTube channel. Or for those of you who would like to help us financially also, you can do that by subscribing to our Patreon or with a one-time donation through Ko-fi. As you know, there has been a quite severe legal crackdown on climate groups all around Europe in recent years, coupled with the rise of the far right in many countries who are very fossil fuel friendly. It's becoming quite difficult to do climate activism, especially in countries like Romania, where the movement is very small and hasn't reached a critical mass yet. So with that in mind, first of all, we would hope for this project to reach a stage where we can cover a part-time income for some of our members who are involved in the climate movement here. And after a certain threshold is reached, we would like also to redistribute this money to other groups and individuals doing important work on climate here in Romania and in the broadly defined Eastern Europe and the Balkans. Well, that was our show. Until next time, take care, be kind to each other, but also organize to fight back.